supposedly deadly for people, and a cost in monies that is incredible. So don't
listen very closely. Decide for yourself the similarities or differences in this video in comparison to what's happening in our world realistically today, January 29th, 2021.
anyone out there say that I am for irresponsible sex. But I am against lying to our young people. I am against causing death and destruction through that lie. I am against telling a lie to the young people so that they continue in other behaviors which are truly causing AIDS. Now, you've got to ask yourself the reason that I'm here today. And it's been suggested that I'm here to sell a book called Deadly Deception. There's only two ways that you can get the truth to people. By your own words out of your own mouth, and by putting them on paper. And that's the reason for the book. We're talking about probably the most horrible scandal and scam ever perpetrated, not only in the name of science, but in humanity and in all history. Today is December 7th, and I was 12 years old when the attack on Pearl Harbor came, and I remember World War II very well. And it's a very significant day today because I see an incredible parallel between what is going on in the so-called AIDS epidemic and what happened in the years preceding and resulting in World War II. The great lie of Hitler. It's amazing. I think he would envy the job being done by members of the National Institutes of Health and even the media, especially in this country. I charge the media with part of the responsibility, and a very significant one, in a current Holocaust that can end up being worse than the one that occurred during World War II. When it was first announced that Dr. Robert Gallo had found the virus that probably caused AIDS, and that announcement was made with Margaret Heckler in 1984 to the press and to the media without one single scientific document appearing in any journal in the United States. And as we know now, without any proof whatsoever that the virus caused any disease. The media...
What was that? What did you say? That sounds real familiar. Wow.
Virus that probably caused AIDS, and that announcement was made with Margaret Heckler in 1984 to the press and to the media without one single scientific document appearing in any journal in the United States. And as we know now, without any proof whatsoever that the virus caused any disease. The media picked up on it for the sake of a story. And soon, the virus that probably caused AIDS was now the virus that caused AIDS. It was proven in the press and nowhere else. Now, it's interesting, a lot of questions are asked of me whenever I appear before the cameras and do what some people have called a stunt, to sell books. I'm from the planet Earth. I honestly believe that these individuals are from the planet Uranus. How anyone could suggest that I would stick myself with a virus that is supposedly deadly for the purpose of selling a book, that's complete insanity. And I will put the lie to the individuals of the NIH, particularly Gallo and Fauci and Hazeltine and Essex and the rest of these...
What? Who? Did you say what I think you said?
To the press and to the media without one single scientific document appearing in any journal in the United States. And as we know now, without any proof whatsoever that the virus caused any disease. The media picked up on it for the sake of a story, and soon the virus that probably caused AIDS was now the virus that caused AIDS. It was proven in the press and nowhere else. Now, it's interesting, a lot of questions are asked of me whenever I appear before the cameras and do what some people have called a stunt, to sell books. I'm from the planet Earth. I honestly believe that these individuals are from the planet Uranus. How anyone could suggest that I would stick myself with a virus that is supposedly deadly for the purpose of selling a book, that's complete insanity. And I will put the lie to the individuals of the NIH, particularly Gallo and Fauci and Hazeltine and Essex and the rest of these scoundrels of the worst order. Criminals guilty of genocide, without a doubt. I invite them to take me to court. I wish Burroughs Wellcome would take me to court, because they have been putting out a killer drug knowingly. Because in a court of law, I would have the opportunity to provide the absolute proof and evidence, as I have in my book, Deadly Deception. Now, I'm not alone in what I'm doing here today. How does the press escape such obvious truths? Why would the finest virologist in the world, the most noted virologist, member of our National Academy of Sciences, Peter Duesberg, why would he put his entire career on the line? What did he have to gain? He's already lost his laboratory and his funding. They can't take away his professorship because he's tenured. Why would a Charles A. Thomas, professor emeritus of Harvard, say the same thing? Why would Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize in virology last year, why would he stick his neck out? What?
Kary Mullis is the creator of the PCR test. And he died of pneumonia a couple months, 3 or 4 months before the first known because the media announced it, novel coronavirus. Interesting here.
What did he have to gain? These are the questions reporters should be asking. And in order to sell a book, I would inoculate myself with a virus that supposedly is deadly. Ever think that maybe we all know something that you just don't get? That if you take the virus out of the equation, you have a perfectly understandable disease with a perfectly understandable answer. And I might remind you, in case you are not aware of it, and if you haven't read my book, that we have known what causes acquired immune deficiency diseases for at least 70 years. It's in the medical textbooks. It's there for you to read. Number one cause on the face of this earth is malnutrition and starvation. That's African. Look to the headlines of the October 3rd issue of the London Times, Sunday Times last year. And inside headlines that screamed across 2 pages, the plague that never was. Speak to Philip and Evelyn Kreinen, who head Partage with an organization of 250 people, their own hospital, their own doctors, their own laboratories, who have lived in the heart of the epidemic, supposedly, or the supposed epidemic, for 5 years. There is no epidemic. It doesn't exist. They are there. They're not some character who goes through from the World Health Organization and says, oh, I've seen the people dying. Of course you have. We all saw them on television in Somalia. What do you think you were looking at? That was AIDS. Due to starvation. Due to malnutrition. It's no big secret what's causing AIDS. We've known it for 70 years. Number 2 is drugs. And don't just think of street drugs. Because the number one cause of AIDS today is actually two medical drugs. AZT, a drug that was discovered in the 60s as a chemotherapeutic drug for cancer and was shelved because it was too toxic to treat cancer. A drug worse than cancer is being used to treat people who are immunosuppressed. Now let's go back to the other causes of AIDS. So it's not only street drugs but medical drugs, but now 3 is radiation. Whether they worry about it, Chernobyl and Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But number 4 is chemotherapy. Number 4. The number 4 cause of death of acquired immune deficiency diseases. Chemotherapy. And the most toxic chemotherapeutic drug of all times, AZT, is what they're now using to treat AIDS. And the Concord study, completed last year. Now, can you imagine saying to the world, where was the press? Where are you people? Here they're giving a drug that costs thousands of dollars a year, and it doesn't do any good? That's if you want to believe that. But did anybody here bother to look at the insert, the paper that comes with the drug? It's a DNA terminator. It means it is a terminator, just like the movie. It terminates life. You terminate DNA, you terminate life. And they talk about side effects in the insert. When are you going to learn there is no such thing as a side effect in medicine? It's an unwanted direct effect. And you know what one of the unwanted direct effects of AZT is? Lymphoma, cancer, one of the diseases of AIDS, as they call it. Oh, another so-called side effect, which is really an unwanted direct effect, pancytopenia. You need a definition? Pancytopenia. Pan, all, cyto, cells, penia, loss of all your cells. That's AIDS. That is the definition of AIDS. So AZT, by definition, by their own drug insert, causes AIDS, and nobody survives AZT. That will eventually lead to your death. And they've cut the dosage way down because it was killing them too fast. It's like giving somebody a large dose of strychnine and they die within 5 minutes. And so the next person, you give them a few drops of it and they last 4 or 5 days, and you say, strychnine's a wonderful drug. This person lasts 5 times longer. This is the kind of thing that they present to the world. Now, I have offered for over a year now, and I continue to offer it, $100,000 to anyone who will give me one scientific document that proves that HIV causes any serious disease. It doesn't. It is a scandal and a scam beyond belief. The virologists who are responsible for this, what do they have to gain? Now, I don't know what Duesberg had to gain, or Charles A. Thomas, or Kary Mullis. He already got his Nobel Prize. Why does he come out and say it? And he's the one that found the test. The PCR reaction. And he said that there is no body of evidence that supports that the virus causes any disease whatsoever. But what about the individuals who have perpetrated this lie? They are all multi-millionaires. What do we have to say about the National Institutes of Health when a private laboratory, independent laboratory, found AZT to be 1,000 times more toxic than the laboratory of the NIH? We can understand a 5% error in a laboratory, even a 10% error. But a 10,000% error? Or 100,000% error? That's fraud. And as I understand it, the word has gone out, and there's even documents and letters to prove it, that the CDC, the same organization that let blacks go untreated with syphilis, well documented, just to see what would happen with the disease. This same organization who had to admit that they can't give in on the AIDS thing now because nobody would ever be able to trust the government. I think the last election tells us what the people think about government. But science is acting no differently than politicians do. And now we have disease by politics. Isn't it strange that the same day or the day after Robert Gallo filed for a test for HIV after it was announced? This sounds like premeditation. You mean he just happened to have this test available? And so the same day or the following day, he files for a patent? He had a test. He was simply looking for some kind of a disease he wanted to apply it to. And that test. 30,000 Russians who tested positive for HIV were then tested with another test that's supposedly far more accurate to confirm the positivity. And 66 out of 30,000 proved to be positive. That means that the test HIV is 99.997% inaccurate. You want to take a test that's 0.003% right? And you're going to rely on that? But that's what they're doing to people out there. They're taking a test that is not only invalid, it's totally misleading. In fact, when you get results like that, then I would say you're going to be more correct that if you're read as being negative, consider yourself positive. And if you're positive, consider yourself negative. And by the way, at the request of many individuals, I did go for a test a couple of weeks ago in New York City at the biggest clinic there that does more testing than anybody else. And the doctor who ran it was bragging about the fact that he did more. When I told him about the book I wrote, he said, "Shh, don't say anything. My patients might hear." Okay. I tested negative. And of course, Fauci said that you need, when he was answering what I did in Cleveland a week ago, he said, well, he's going to have to stick himself 300 times to transmit the virus. Where are you people in the press? 300 times to transmit a virus? You cannot have an epidemic under those circumstances. If you can't transmit it by blood, you certainly can't transmit it sexually. Unless you're into real sadistic acts during sex. I don't know how much blood you want to draw. It's literally unbelievable what they're getting away with. How does the press let this go? Oh, an epidemic. The United States government says 12,000 people died each year from 1985 to 1992. Now, a child in public school will tell you an epidemic starts out in 1 year. You got everybody's involved. That's where they would put it. 12,000 a year for 7 years in a row? That's not epidemic. By definition, it's endemic. And you would expect in 7 years, considering it spreads sexually, that you'd have probably 15 to 20 million. We're a pretty active country when it comes to sex. We like to put it down, but we sure belie it in the behavior that we do. Oh, an epidemic, really. In Russia, 105 deaths from AIDS since 1987. In Philippines, 80 deaths since 1984. Epidemics? There is no epidemic. But who has to gain from this? Dr. Duesberg? What is he gaining from this? That alone should alert the press to who's telling the truth. And if you hear an argument amongst politicians and one calls the other names and doesn't answer the specific charges scientifically, who's the liar? Fauci and Gallo, instead of answering the scientific conflicts and contradictions that Dr. Duesberg has so brilliantly pointed out, instead of answering them, they call him a homophobe. Can you imagine? I've been called a homophobe too. I wonder, I come here with a message of hope to not only the gays, but to the blacks and the Hispanics and all the other outcasts of society, which strangely enough are the only groups that have been connected with the so-called AIDS. Because you see, if you belong to one of those groups, you've got AIDS. But if you don't belong to one of those groups, you get the respectable diagnosis of you have tuberculosis, you have lymphoma, you have leukemia, you have Kaposi sarcoma, pneumocystis pneumonia, 30 plus diseases. Where is the press? How do they buy a story that a virus knows what country it's in? 3 symptoms in Africa, but 30 diseases in the United States and Europe. How do they buy the story that a virus has prejudices? It prefers men over women 9-1 in the United States and Europe, but men and women equally in Africa. It knows whether you're gay or straight, married or single, black or white. It should be hired by the immigration department because it does one heck of a job. This is what they've been feeding to the public, and this is what you and the press have published. It's funny, every time that I've stuck myself with a needle, I get calls from major television shows by excited young people who want to tell the truth. And then I get a call 3 days later telling me that it's been nixed at a higher level. That's no surprise. After all, who am I fighting? 2 drug industries. One supposedly legitimate and the other illegitimate. And they do an awful lot of advertising, the supposed legitimate ones. All those things out there that they sell for your colds and everything else, that's the pharmaceutical industry. And they also put out prescription drugs, most of them. And they pull the purse strings. And so we have a better propaganda machine in the United States than Hitler had in his time. You see, Hitler pulled off a lie, and he was condemned for it by most of the world, although believed by 3 major groups of the Axis powers. The liars and killers like Fauci and Gallo and Hazeltine and Essex and Flossie von Stahl and the Margaret Fischels, these people are getting by with the lie and getting paid immense sums of money for it and praise from the rest of the world while they murder. The study at the University of Miami was completely fraudulent. You see, I believed that the virus caused AIDS from 1984 to 88, and I treated AIDS patients. One of the few doctors willing to. The doctors were scared for their lives to even treat the patient. And by the way, sticking my finger, nothing new. I did it lots of times in treating my AIDS patients. And in fact, it's amazing that in spite of the fact that we are at such great exposure to this deadly disease, the incidence of the disease amongst medical personnel of all types is less than the general population. This is a first in the history of science. Think about that. How is it possible? Maybe the virus has nothing to do with it. Not only maybe, the virus has nothing to do with it. In 1988, I was invited to a dinner where Burroughs Wellcome was going to push AZT as a drug for treating AIDS. And we were told we could ask questions during the dinner because Margaret Fischel was going to be speaking. And when she mentioned that the drug AZT had 56 side effects, I raised my hand. And I said, Dr. Fischel, how do you do a double-blind study on a drug with 56 side effects? You've got to know if you're on the drug. And she said to me and the rest of the doctors sitting there, well, the placebo had 31. And I raised my hand again. How could a placebo have 31 side effects? How could an inert substance have 31 side effects? I didn't know what was wrong then, but I knew there was something wrong. I knew there was something dreadfully wrong, and I didn't know how dreadfully wrong and how deadly wrong it was. But the answer came years later. The FDA, as you probably know, released AZT after 4 months of a proposed 6-month study. They cut it short because one group in this double-blind study where nobody knew who was on what, one group was doing better than another group. And so out of compassion, they terminated the study. I don't blame them for that. And sure enough, the AZT group was doing so much better than the placebo group. And so they released the drug. But then 18 months later, their own investigator from the FDA brought back his report. And guess what it showed? The participants in the study knew the first week who was on the drug and who wasn't. You didn't have a double-blind study. It wasn't the Cadillac of studies. Not only that, some of those on AZT admitted to sharing their drug with members of the placebo group. That explains the 31 side effects in a placebo group. Some of them were taking AZT. Side effects. But, and by the way, that makes it a complete washout as a scientific study. Right then and there, the drug should have been discontinued, called back. But then came the kicker in this report. The individuals on the AZT in the 4 months of the study received 6 times more blood transfusions than the placebo group. What happens when you get a blood transfusion? You look better, you feel better, and you live a little bit longer. But the most important question and lesson from all of this, you must ask the question, why did those on AZT need 6 times more transfusions in a 4-month period than the individuals on the placebo? Because you're dealing with a killer drug, and you need those blood transfusions to survive, and coincidentally they made you look a little bit better and healthier than the other group. And then, after I go through all this, invariably somebody's going to ask the question, so what really causes AIDS? And I had to say it 10 times or 20 times in my book, and I'm going to say it again now. We have known for 70 years why the other individuals in the study died. The number one cause is malnutrition and starvation. Well, to an extent that was true of some of these individuals, but only true because of the second reason. The number 2 cause is drugs. You recall, you fellows and gals in the press, a couple of weeks ago you reported in your newspapers that we were killing off our senior citizens with too many drugs. And how do you cure them? You get them off the drugs. And how were these people dying of so-called AIDS? From the number 2 cause, drugs. Both medical and street drugs. But one in particular that stood out and has been linked by 24 scientific papers with Kaposi sarcoma, and that's poppers or amyl nitrite. It's very rare that you see a case of Kaposi sarcoma in Africa because they don't use poppers. And this is the first disease, human disease, we can't give to a simian monkey. And I'm talking about legitimate diseases. Because you see, the virologists have been coming up with more diseases than you can imagine. And haven't you bothered to notice? Most of them never pan out. They disappear from the headlines, and they're never heard of again because they weren't diseases really in the first place. Like SMON, a disease in Japan. For 15 years, they pursued viruses. And what did it turn out to be? Enteroviroform, a drug for diarrhea that they were using over there. Amazing, isn't it? And they spent 15 years and lots of millions of dollars. But guess what our virologists have done? Wow, they hold a candle to no one. For 20 years in Nixon's war on cancer, they spent over $20 billion looking for a virus that caused cancer. And they came up empty-handed. They not only couldn't find a retrovirus, which was the ideal choice because it doesn't kill cells, and it's multiplied by the cells, which is what cancer cells do, but they never found any disease that it caused. But guess what they chose for the scam of AIDS? A retrovirus. Already $20 billion in 20 years, we found nothing that it does. And we also found that absolutely it doesn't kill cells, because if it did, it would commit suicide. It needs the cell in order to replicate, to be alive. So the epidemic would be over before it began. It's impossible. But this is the virus. They've just spent another $20 billion in only 10 years' time. And they're asking for more. And now they want to give us a vaccine. See? Oh, will they make money with that? They not only have a test for HIV, which, by the way, is not for the virus. It's for immunity. Like I say, it's the first disease in the history of medicine. When you're immune to it, you're going to die from it. But now, they want to give us a vaccine. The test HIV tests for antibodies, not for the virus. Well, antibodies is what you get when you use a vaccine. You want to produce antibodies to fight the disease. I'm at a loss to understand. If we already have the antibodies, why do we want to create the antibodies? Kind of redundant, isn't it? Oh, by the way, if you take these very same antibodies and you put them in Gallo's culture in his laboratory, you just ruined his multi-million-dollar culture that he's making a fortune out of. Because you see, these antibodies destroy the culture. Does the press bother reading? Do they understand the English language? And yet you want to condemn me and say that I'm out for publicity? Well, what is it that Peter Duesberg is out for? He held the reputation, and still amongst honest scientists, as being the foremost virologist in the world. What is Kary Mullis out for? He just won the Nobel Prize. Why does he want to put at risk that incredibly marvelous reputation of being a Nobel Prize winner? Why would he put that at risk? Unless maybe there's still some honest scientists around. Now, what about the rest of them out there? You know, I often ask myself the question, if my children were still in school, and I had house payments to make, and I had to put them through school, etc., would I be doing what I'm doing today? I don't think I've ever answered the question because I'm kind of afraid of what I might answer if I was going to answer honestly. And he who is without sin shouldn't be casting any stones. So I won't cast the stones at the thousands and thousands and thousands of virologists out there who are going along with this scam. Because, you see, they would be out of jobs if they dared criticize Margaret Heckler or the heads of the NIH. They'd be out of jobs, and they'd have families that they have to support, and futures that would be down the drain. You don't cross the establishment. And so the lie is being perpetuated by the silence. And even Gallo would say to the press in answer to the question, what does he have to say about Duesberg's challenges? And he says, well, if we're wrong, why do so many people believe us? I mean, I could just see Hitler and his stormtroopers saying to the press, if we're wrong, why does everybody do what we tell them to do? Because they're running the show, and you're looking at not just a simple lie of science. In the back of my book, I have the picture of Pedro Tocino of Spain, father of 2 young girls, a hemophiliac. Nothing wrong with the man. But because he received so-called tainted blood they had him on AZT. I stuck myself to get that man off AZT. I said, if I stick myself with your blood, will it convince you there's nothing to worry about? And Pedro Tessino, now over a year later, is very healthy, having a wonderful life, enjoying his 2 young daughters. But all of his friends are dying or are dead. This is real. And I don't blame those scientists out there keeping their mouths shut because their jobs depend on it. And I understand that exists in the press too. But you've got organizations. And in a way, so do the virologists have organizations. And if enough of the honest ones would stand up and take that chance, if you all stand together, you make a statement. And you can do that in your press associations, even though the people who own the newspapers and the television shows are afraid of losing their sponsors. You can at least keep your dignity. That's the choice you have to make. And that's the choice that I have had to make. I figured that if I didn't do what I knew was right, I'd end up cutting my throat shaving in the morning, because I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And that's the honest, simple truth. I am sticking my finger to bring attention to the current Holocaust, and it's a dreadful one. When you terminate the DNA of a human being, they waste away and die in an inhuman fashion. We all have the right to die with dignity. But if we told them the truth, a lot of them wouldn't die at all. They'd simply get off the poppers and off the drugs. And there's no dishonor in being gay, in admitting that you've been on drugs. The decent human beings in this world will give you the support and help you, like we help drug addicts of all followings, so to speak. Those that would turn against you have turned against you anyway, because of what you feel and what you are. And there are even some religious groups who have turned against the gays and said it was God's vengeance. How can you believe in a loving God and believe that that God would cause such a terrible disease amongst humans? Now, this is a man-caused disease, but we all make mistakes in life. And that shouldn't stop the compassion and the love and the understanding of decent human beings. And so I do the act of sticking my finger and create another blood brother in my life, as the ancient Indians have done. And I will get another one today. Because I'm not afraid of getting AIDS. I know as a scientist that there is nothing to fear. I know what causes AIDS. I am not going to lie to others nor myself about it. I don't like sticking myself with a needle because it hurts. And if you've ever seen my expression on pictures, you know that to be true. So, Kim Freitas. Kim, are you here?
Yeah.
We're going to become blood brothers.
Yeah.
And please, to the press and to everyone else, I don't intend to stick myself 300 times, because it wouldn't prove anything anyway. Oh, and might I say that a Dr. Gottlieb, who achieved fame for being the doctor that noted the first 4 or 5 cases of AIDS, who said to me on a radio broadcast the other night, he would believe me if I took a liter of blood. That's a transfusion of blood. And I said, you know, you must be mad. What is that going to prove? If you need a liter of blood to get AIDS, then nobody's going to get AIDS.
Right.
In any case, well, I got to do myself first, and then I have to do you. Here, but let me do your finger, okay? I mean, I got to do you first, right?
All right.
Excuse me. Then I got to do me. Excuse me, I have that backwards. All right. Wait a minute. Got to find. This is a heck of a time to lose my I need it. There we go. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a typical butterfly needle set. If somebody has a scissor, it'll help. No, I got it. Okay. It's sterile. And usually we use it to take blood by sticking this in, and then we can inject things also. So, let's do that. We got this.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm going to... let me put my glasses on, okay?
Good.
I think you'd rather I do that. I got to tell you a cute little story. Shortly after my son was born many years ago, he's now 40, he got some kind of an infection or whatnot, and I spoke to the pediatrician at the hospital. I was an intern at the time, and he said, go home and give him a shot of penicillin. So I took the syringe and everything home, and my wife held Bruce over her shoulder, and I grabbed his little bottom cheek, and I go like this, and I stuck it right into my thumb, so.
Careful.
You can tell I don't like doing this, never have. Okay. We want to get a lot of blood. There we go. Okay? There we go. Now, I'm wiping this needle thoroughly in this blood. And I say to my friends Fauci and Gottlieb and Galpin and Gallo and all the rest of those criminals, all right, that this is for the sake of humanity and no other reason. And believe me, it hurts. And this is in the hope that it'll save the lives of millions of individuals who will die because of the greatest lie ever told.
Thank you.
Thank you. Get off drugs, he's right. Get off drugs. Now, I will be happy to take questions from the press or from anyone for that matter to clarify in your...
If you don't understand this by now, you never will.